Welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is Felipe Osario. So we have a spectacular episode today about Atlantis. And I know I was supposed to make this episode months ago, but we're back to Atlantis. And if you guys didn't catch the episode, I highly recommend it. I'm going to give the description or the link at the end of the episode. So just talking a little bit about Atlantis, this findings that you guys are going to see in this episode are, some of these findings are published absolutely nowhere else. And, I have to say that the information about Atlantis was highly inspired by other work. And I always like to reference the people who have essentially inspired the work that I'm presenting to you guys. So definitely check out the channels below, which are inspirations to this episode, but it's not everything. I mean, we've discovered something that is absolutely, I think, gonna shock you guys. Now, I'd like to talk about the structure called the Richat Structure, which is in West Africa in the Sahara, in a country called Mauritania. Absolutely almost nothing going on there. Just a few Islamic scholars, some nomadic tribes, and just in this very anomalous structure, which some researchers have proposed could be the site of Atlantis. Now you might be asking, how could Atlantis be in West Africa? Well, you have to remember that Atlantis, if you were to take Plato's account, or at least account of Solon, Atlantis is at least 12,500 years ago. So this is quite some time. And if you consider how much landmass has actually risen, we don't know every geological process that occurred. We know that West Africa is a volcanic region and would essentially allow Atlantis to be a possible structure that at once was sunken and then through geological processes was brought back up into light, basically in front of our eyes, so closely that we hadn't seen it till this point. So is there other reasons why I would think that this particular region is Atlantis? Well, yeah, for one, look at it. It doesn't just look like Atlantis, it actually has the exact measurements provided by Solon, which converts to a diameter of around 23 miles. To add to that, the actual description of Atlantis included a warm water stream as well as a cold water stream that seemed to flow into the community. Now, this is actually a very strange geological phenomenon because for that to happen, you'd have to have different sources of water. It so happens in this exact region in the Richat structure, there's evidence of canals that goes not just all the way to the oceans, which is about 400 miles away, but also canals that goes to underwater streams. So in this exact geological region, we actually have two different water sources, one being fresh water, the other one being salt water. So I thought that was kind of a unique, that's kind of a really strange geological phenomenon you don't see very often. Another thing, you see these mountains in the north, not just mountains, but you see these streams and possibly waterfalls, just as was described in Atlantis. It was said that Atlantis was composed of red rocks and black rocks, and supposedly the few inhabitants that live around the region have collected artifacts that seem to resemble black and red rocks. Going further with this, in this region, they've actually discovered whale bones. Atlantis was said to have sunken 12,500 years ago. If you watched our previous episode, you would have heard about the theory that perhaps there was some kind of meteor strike that was responsible for perhaps a tsunami that wiped out Atlantis. Now, we're not certain that the meteor strike is directly related to the sinking of Atlantis itself, but what we can say, they have discovered a potential site in Greenland that could account for a meteor strike around the exact same time period. But to add to that, in this exact region, they've discovered a meteorite that supposedly, according to legends, had come from an iron mountain. Now, many of you might be crossing your eyes thinking, no, I'm not believing this. There's no way that this is Atlantis. Now, probably the most convincing out of all the evidence that I've encountered is the actual history of the country itself. You might have heard of a Greek titan named Atlas. Now, according to the legends of Atlas, this Greek hero turned Atlas into stone, and supposedly that stone became a mountain range. Now, it so happened in West Northern Africa, there is a mountain range called the Atlas Mountains. Now, what's so amazing, it's not just this mountain range, but actually the Atlantic Ocean was named after Atlas. In fact, the entire name Atlantis actually translates to the Island of Atlas. But what's so amazing is we're not talking about the Greek titan Atlas. The actual name Atlas derived from the king of Mauritania, of this country, of this exact region. And this king used to be a philosopher, and supposedly there's very little information that is known about him. But the point is, the derivative of Atlas is coming from this specific king, from this specific tiny little desert country. So by this point, I'm thinking, how could this not be Atlantis, given the fact that this area is geological? It could have risen, it could have sunk and then risen. There's evidence of meteor strikes. There's evidence of catastrophes. There's geological evidence. There's a unique circular structure that you find nowhere else in the world that just happens to match the exact dimensions that are given by Plato's uncle Solon. Oh, and look, you're not going to find this anywhere else, because this is something that I just randomly discovered, and once again seem to back up this premise that the Richat structure is indeed Atlantis. Now, if you remember, Atlantis sunk probably around 12,500 years ago. Now, there are a few legends from a few cultures that might have been the progenitors of Atlantis, or the sinking of Atlantis, or at least the survivors of Atlantis. The Dogon tribe seem to have it in their legends that their ancestors were these people who had come from an island that had been sunk. The Egyptians also talked about how their heritage might have come from Atlantis. Even the Athenians had a legend that they once fought this Atlantis culture. But one thing that you may not be considering is the Native Americans. See, the Native Americans came around, 13,000 years ago? And there was one specific native culture that was associated with one of the earliest inhabitants of America, and that is the Clovis people. Now, what's so amazing about the Clovis people is they were specifically known for their arrowheads. It was a very unique design called the flute design, which was more technologically sound. It was just a better design in general. Now, this flute design, what amazed me is that when I looked at the artifacts of the Richat structure, they found arrowheads. Not just any arrowheads. Now, from my interpretation, now I'm not an expert here, but from just best guess type of interpretation, the arrowheads that I'm looking at near the Richat structure seem to match very closely to what was considered to be a very unique, particular type of design that was only associated with the Clovis people. So now we have a design that's supposed to be unique only to Clovis people appearing across the ocean in Africa near a structure that we're now saying might have been Atlantis. And if you didn't know, the Clovis people did arrive in America 13,000 years ago. So the estimation is just plus or minus 500 years from the sinking of Atlantis, or what we think to be the sinking of Atlantis. So if that's not enough, what I want to do is take a journey into Google Earth and show some of the amazing mysterious structures, including a possible port that we have found near what we think might be Atlantis. So let's take a look.